Synoptic Assessment webinar. So are we all studying the level 4 at the moment, partway through some of the other units? If you want to send anything to me, there's the little chat box down in the corner, so you can send me questions, answer questions as we go through the webinar. Now, just to make sure that you can see everything that you need to as I go through this, you should have some slides. The first one showing Synoptic Assessment Professional Diploma in Accounting. And hopefully, if I do this, you'll see some pre-release assessment material come up. So could I just check that that did appear okay for you? Thank you, Zoe. So I can see there you're started your level 4 and got your first exam complete. So that's good stuff. So the idea of this webinar this evening is to just give you a little bit of information about what this synoptic assessment is about, because it's obviously something new to AQ 2016 and is quite a different style of assessment to what we've seen before. And we will talk a little bit about level 4 as we go through. If at any time you can't hear me, it drops out or the screen goes blank, or you have any questions, please just type away in the chat box and hopefully I can answer them or sort out if anything does go wrong. Just to go through to start with our level 4 professional diploma in accounting, a reminder of what's in it. We've got our 2 management accounting units. So we've got budgeting and decision and control. I'm imagining for those of you who have started your level 4, you've probably started with one of these units, perhaps budgeting. If you have sat any assessments so far at level 4, you've probably noticed that they are quite a lot harder than level 3, and also that the assessments, the style of questions is less predictable than what we've seen at level 3 and also under the old syllabus. The AAT have certainly put a lot more into developing their questions for this new syllabus, and there's less of a structured format. It's much more about testing your knowledge and application. So we've also got there at level 4 financial statements of limited companies. So all 3 of those assessments have their own unit assessments, and under the old syllabus that would have been it for those units, but now they are tested again at the end of your qualification as part of the synoptic assessment. We've also got accounting systems and control, which is a unit in itself, but it doesn't have a single unit assessment. It is only assessed as part of the synoptic. You'll notice here on my slide there's a mention of endpoint assessment. That's just relevant if you're studying this as an apprentice, but otherwise it's not part of the core qualification. I've also noted here the optional papers. So we've got the 2 tax papers, credit management, external audit, cash and treasury management. I will come back to these optional papers a little bit later. None of them are specifically assessed as part of the synoptic. So you can sit the synoptic assessment and then take your options, or you can take your options first and then do the synoptic assessment. But I will pick up on something about those as we go through these slides. So what the synoptic assessment is all about, it's about looking at the way in which all of the papers that you've studied integrate together. So how our financial accounting and our management accounting functions are actually working together, how they interrelate, and how information is shared and used both in a financial and management accounting way. The The Synoptic Assessment assesses your knowledge across all of the papers, how they all fit together. And I think it's really good. We used to have the kind of situation, we'd study a unit, we'd learn it, it would be put to one side, and we wouldn't really go back to it. Whereas this new Synoptic Assessment forces us to really go back and think about the way in which everything we've learned can be used to help a business grow, move forward, and improve performance. And it's a really useful skill, but if you have your own business, for if you're working as a finance manager or a higher role within an organisation, and it's also very useful if you're moving on to a further qualification where there's much more of an emphasis on the integration of everything that you learn. So the accounting systems and control unit that is just assessed within the Synoptic Assessment it's used to be our project-based unit. So under the old syllabus, you might have heard horror stories about the project that people had to complete, which would be based on a case study or they'd use work-based evidence. That project has gone, and we've got this accounting systems and control unit that's assessed as part of the professional synoptic assessment. So what that means is this has been a replacement here. And so the synoptic assessment is going to give you a scenario, a business situation. Is going to tell you some information about an organisation, how it operates, what systems it's got, what its performance is, its strengths and its weaknesses. And we'll want you to use all of that information to answer some tasks. So we used to have work-based evidence. This has kind of replaced that and really want you to absorb yourself within that organisation and look at the decisions that are made within an organisation, the processes and systems that they've got in place. So here I'm going to pick up a bit on the optional units. So none of the optional units are assessed as part of the synoptic assessment. However, if you decide that you're going to do external auditing as one of your optional units, it would be beneficial to you for you to complete that external audit unit before you do the synoptic assessment. The reason for that is external audit has a big section. Sorry, just picking up on your question there, Kate. Yes, decision and control is the financial performance unit from the old syllabus. The content is very, very similar. There's a few little additions, but it is basically the content of financial performance. So external audit has a lot of internal controls in it and really looks at weaknesses in internal controls and looks at ways in which internal controls could be improved. So if you are thinking of doing that as an optional unit, definitely it's beneficial to do it before the synoptic assessment. Now, thinking as a whole about all of the optional papers, credit management and cash and treasury management, those two units also do pick up on knowledge which could be beneficial or useful when it comes to this synoptic assessment. The two tax units really kind of stand alone now. There isn't any content within those tax units that would be useful or would be brought into the synoptic assessment in any way. So it might just be something that you want to consider if you're choosing your options, you're not too sure which ones you're going to go for, or you're thinking about the order in which to do your papers. Now, you do have to have attempted the Management Accounting Budgeting, Decision and Control and Financial Statements Limited companies before you can sit your synoptic assessment. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to have passed them, but you have to have scheduled them and sat those assessments before you sit a synoptic assessment. I would say you really need to be passing these units because the knowledge in those is going to pull in to the Synoptic. So the Synoptic Assessment is a computer-based assessment, and I've just realised I've put on there it's 3 hours. It's not 3 hours, it's 2 hours. At level 3, it's 3 hours, so it's a 2-hour assessment for the professional level. The assessment is partially computer marked and partly human marked. Now, what that tells us is there will be some questions within the Synoptic Assessment that are drag and drop, gap fill, numerical gap fill questions, perhaps control accounts, completing pro formas, or matching answers, because those parts can all be computer marked. The fact that part of it is human marked means that there will be some written and discursive questions. Now, we saw the discursive questions introduced under the old syllabus just at level 4. The written questions now are part of every one of the Synoptic assessments, and at level 4, now we don't have the project, it is the only opportunity for the AAT to be testing your detailed understanding and ability to provide an explanation of topics and knowledge that you've gained. So there is quite a lot expected of you now as part of these discursive or written questions for the Synoptic paper. For those of you who have already sat some of the level 4 papers, you've probably seen that they are a little bit more detailed on the written questions as a whole at level 4 now. Because there's a human marked part, it does mean that it takes 6 weeks to get your results, because it needs to go through and be marked by the AAT and also go through their whole moderation and standardisation processes, their quality control for checking the marking that takes place. So it will take up to that 6 weeks. I would plan that you wouldn't receive your results in less than 5 weeks. The demand for these Synoptic assessments is going to be high, and there is quite a good quality control process that they have to go through, which is why it takes the full 6 weeks. Competency is set at 70%. We also have our grading that we have in place now as well. So the learning outcomes, what the Synoptic assessment is testing, you are demonstrating an understanding of the role and responsibilities of the accounting function within the organisation. What this learning outcome is telling us is that you're being tested on your knowledge of the role of financial accounting, as well as the role of management accounting. So you're going to be tested on your understanding of that financial statements of limited companies paper and content, as to why we have that within the organisation, what it is that they do, how they do it, and how that benefits the organisation. You're also going to be looking at what you've learned from the budgeting and decision and control papers, and understanding what the management accounting function provides to the organisation. Evaluation of internal control systems. So this is from the accounting systems and control units, and this does dominate the paper in quite a big way. Accounting systems and controls, the internal controls, are a really important function within an organisation. So they are really well tested at this unit, and you can perhaps see them being tested through most of the tasks within the Synoptic assessment. This is the learning outcome where, if you've studied external audit before, it will give you lots of knowledge that will help you here. Of course, if you don't choose that as an option, it is covered as part of the accounting systems and control unit, so you will be prepared for this. Evaluation of an organisation's accounting systems and underpinning procedures. What this wants you to do is to look at the accounting system that is in place in the scenario that you're given. So what they have a computer system, a purchase ledger, a sales ledger. They have people working within the purchase ledger and sales ledger as part of the general ledger. We have bank reconciliations and other reconciliations going on. We have reports that come out of our accounting system, checks that are done, and all the procedures that go behind those to make sure that the information is being gathered, input, and checked within the accounting system, and that the information is being pulled out of the accounting system that's then used in decision making. Now, this learning outcome wants us to appreciate, how does that accounting system work? How good is it? What strengths have they got? What weaknesses have they got? And wants us to look at ways in which an organisation's accounting system can be improved. Now, there is quite a bit of overlap between learning outcome 2 and 3. Within our accounting system, we would hope to have lots of good, strong internal controls in place. And we're potentially, within a task, a question in this paper, looking at what are the weaknesses in our internal controls within this accounting system or within our procedures that we have in place. And learning outcome 4 is about analysing recommendations to improve an organisation's accounting system. Now, for this learning outcome, you could be presented with potential options, new ideas, strategies, things that an organisation is looking at bringing in, and you might be looking at whether they're going to work. So perhaps we've got a change to one of our policies or procedures, or we're looking at implementing a new system in the organisation. We might need to analyse that. Is it going to build on our strengths? Is it going to overcome the weaknesses? Is it going to improve our internal controls? Is it going to improve the information that's coming out of our accounting system? So these learning outcomes, it's worth bearing in mind what it is that this paper is testing when you're going through and you're revising and learning the materials. So what kind of things are being tested? Now, you're expected to show an understanding of the role of the accounting function in an organisation. Now, our accounting function will enable us to meet statutory requirements, so the financial statements that we need to produce and file. But the accounting function will also help us do those 3 things that the management accounting function is there for: our planning, our control, and our decision making. So in a given scenario for this paper, you'll be expected to understand how the accounting function provides that information for us to be able to set our plans, and how the accounting function helps us set plans, how it helps us to monitor and control our performance, and the kind of information that's provided for making decisions. So lots of that comes from those 2 management accounting papers at level 4. You'll also be tested on the importance of internal controls in minimising the risk of loss. Now, internal controls are those things that we have in place to make sure that there is no fraud, that there is no misrepresentation of funds, so no one's stealing money or goods from the company or any of the fixed assets. They're also there to make sure that the information we receive out of our accounting system is accurate. So it enables us to file accurate accounts, but also have accurate information for decision making. So an example of an internal control in relation to the banking system in an organisation would be the authorisation procedures that we have in place. So an internal control may be that every cheque has to be signed by 2 directors, or every BACS transfer has to be authorised by 2 directors. That will help to minimise the risk of someone taking money out that there shouldn't be. Another internal control in relation to banking would be our bank reconciliation. Our bank reconciliation is a check to make sure that our accounting system, the information that's within our accounting system, is accurate. So checking that our balances agree from our bank statements through to our accounting system for our bank. So we could be asked to look at the internal controls in relation to sales, in relation to purchases, bank, or perhaps even payroll. We could also be tested on our accounting system identifying the weaknesses within an accounting system. So can we identify within a scenario that we're given where the weaknesses are? Maybe there's a lack of procedures, a lack of controls and checks. Maybe there's delays in information being put into our accounting system. Can we identify where there's weaknesses? And can we assess the impact of those weaknesses on the organisation? So perhaps we've got some weaknesses surrounding our cash procedures. The danger there is that we don't have as much cash as we thought we had. We may not be able to pay our suppliers. It might well stop us being able to get more goods and things like that. So we identify weaknesses and look at how it might affect the organisation and how it runs in the future, and how successful and what its performance might be like in the future. Make recommendations to address the weaknesses. You might have to come up with some ideas. There are some weaknesses, they've been identified. How could these be improved? What could the organisation do? And this is going to be a written or discursive question where you really need to think about some ideas. How can I improve this situation? Making recommendations, you need to think about the impact of those on the organisation. How much is it going to cost? Perhaps doing a bit of a cost-benefit analysis. We want to make sure that the benefits of any recommendations outweigh the costs. We might also be thinking about anything we want to implement or change our recommendations. How are they going to impact on staff? Do staff need to be trained? Is it going to change their job role? Is it going to cost the organisation more money for staff training? Could it affect motivation? Also being tested on how you apply knowledge and understanding that you've gained from the core units, so from financial statements, budgeting, and decision and control. Now, I think the important thing to remember here is you could be tested on anything that you've covered on those units. And you could be tested on a fairly small topic in quite a big way. So perhaps something like target costing, which is part of our management papers. You'd be prepared, you will have studied it, you might have had one or two small questions in the core paper on it. You could find that you have a whole task that is related to target costing, that you've got to involve explanation, impact on staff, and how it's going to affect the organisation. Something like the product life cycle. You might need to think about the product life cycle alongside pricing. And it could be tested in quite a big way. So I think from this we can pick up the key thing is to make sure that your knowledge on those core papers is up to date. Now, if you've transferred to AQ 2016, having studied some units under AQ 2013, if it's a while ago since you studied those units, you do need to make sure that you bring your knowledge up to date. If you're unsure of the changes in syllabus, perhaps you may feel that there might be some knowledge that you've missed from the change in syllabus, do get in touch with me. At the end of this, I will give you my email address and I can let you know of the changes that have happened between AQ 13 and AQ 16 and provide you with a bit of help to make sure you haven't got any gaps in your knowledge. So where did we get to? The next one, review a planned change in policy. Identify potential problem areas while one system is being changed to another. You might be given in a scenario that a policy is being changed or a procedure is being changed or that a new system is being implemented. And you would need to think about what issues is this going to cause? Is it going to cause additional work? lack in motivation, loss of information, duplication, and think about the impact it will have on the performance of the organisation. If it's going to cost more, profits are going to go down, less cash available, we might need to think about how that might affect the organisation. Make suitable recommendations to ensure the integrity of the accounting system is maintained. This might be recommendations for additional procedures that will increase the internal controls that are in place. Demonstrate your analytical and problem-solving skills, exercising judgment to make informed recommendations. This is that you're expected to be able to give very practical advice on whether something is going to be beneficial for the organisation. Maybe it's looking at changing a system, maybe implementing some new software. Perhaps you need to identify the problems that might occur and be able to recommend how you can reduce the issues that these might cause for the organisation. And finally here, tested on having a sound understanding of management accounting and financial accounting information requirements and the way in which the accounting function needs to support both areas. So what information do we take out of our system that helps us prepare our financial accounts? And what do we take out that helps us with our planning, control and decision making? And how does our accounting system and function, those people that work within that area, make sure that we have the information that enables us to do both things? So very much about an integrated support there. So have we heard that our Synoptic at level 4 has some pre-release material? So hopefully you have heard a mention that we now have this. This makes the Synoptic assessment much more interesting and allows us to be able to get our teeth into it, and much more than when we're given a very small scenario within an assessment. So pre-release material is only at the professional level, Synoptic. So levels 2 and 3 don't have this, it's only at level 4. And the pre-release material gives us some background information about an organisation. And then our Synoptic assessment is going to be based on that organisation. So the purpose of this pre-release material is to give you that background information and allow you to know much more about the scenario that you're going to be tested on. Enable you to really think about the industry in which they operate. So you can think about the kinds of costs that they incur, the kind of market in which they might operate, and the sorts of competitors that they might have. And also to think about how their costs might be structured, thinking about our fixed and our variable costs, and how costs might increase or reduce, and what external factors might affect this industry. It allows you to be able to really think about how the business operates within a wider environment. The pre-release material is there to give you background, to give you something to work on before the exam. It's really important that you spend time reading through the pre-release material, really absorbing yourself into it and feeling like you actually work as part of that organisation. Now in the assessment, you can't take a copy of the pre-release material in with you, but you are provided it as part of the assessment in pop-up windows. By the time you go into your assessment though, you should know that pre-release material really well. You should feel like you know that organisation, that if someone asked you a question about it, you could pull out that information that you've looked at within the pre-release material. But of course you have got the copy there that you can refer to if you need to. So what should you do with the pre-release material? You should familiarise yourself with it. Read it again, understand it, think about it, so that you know the industry and you know the organisation. You know its size, its structure, who works within that organisation, and any performance information that you're given, you actually know how they've been doing up to now, how they've been performing, what kind of position they're in. You should also consider topics from the management accounting units and how they could apply to the scenario. So think about the product life cycle. Whereabouts are there products within the product life cycle? That can help us think about the costs that are being incurred, of the prices that are being set, and where we think they might go performance-wise in the future. Review the financial information and think about your financial accounting paper. What standards are important here? What are relevant? Calculate ratios, or if you're given ratios, read them, understand them. Ratios are in all of our papers. They never go away. Whatever we're studying, we will always have some gross profit margins, asset turnovers, return on capital employed, and all of those kind of ratios. Calculate them, know them, understand them, think about them. Why are they like that for this organisation? Return on capital employed is a really useful, important calculation, so make sure you know that for the pre-release material. And remember, it's can be broken down into our net profit margin and our asset turnover. Consider a SWOT. Consider the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I would say one of your starting points with the pre-release material should be to undertake a SWOT analysis. So grab a piece of paper, split it into 4, and have strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Read through the pre-release material and jot down as many things as you can under each heading. Once you've gone through the pre-release material and come up with as many SWOTs as you can, then start to think about, well, what else could happen within this industry? What else might be relevant? And see if there's any other opportunities and threats you can generate ideas about. When you go through the pre-release materials, think about, what recommendations could I make for improvements? If you've identified 6 weaknesses, look at those weaknesses and think, what would I recommend would improve and overcome those? So these are all things that you can do to prepare yourself well for your synoptic assessment. Any weaknesses that you've found, think about, how do they impact on the organisation? How do they impact on performance? How do they impact on staff morale? If you've identified some recommendations, think about how they will impact on performance. Are costs going to go up, or are costs going to go down? Are staff going to need training? Are they going to need to do more work? Will there be less staff? Will we have more accurate figures and better decisions? Those recommendations, how are they going to affect the organisation in the future? So this synoptic paper is a much more strategic paper than we've ever seen at AAT before. It really does consider that integrated approach and the future performance of the organisation. So before we have a look at the pre-release material, has anyone got any questions? No, you're all very quiet. So I can see we've had a couple of other people join us since I first started. So hello to you too. So the pre-release material, let's have a little look at this. When you log into your MyAAT account and you go to the study resources that are available, there is a mock assessment for the synoptic, professional synoptic assessment. Now the sample assessment that is available on the AAT website is not based on the same pre-release material as your real assessment will be. So the sample assessments are there just to give you an idea of the style of questions, the types of things that you could be asked, but they are based on a pre-release material that is specific to those sample assessments. Also within those study resources, you've got this live assessment pre-release material. Now, this is the material you have about the actual scenario that's going to be tested in your synoptic assessment. So we've got here Green Print Limited, and you're the accounting technician within the company. I'm not going to read through the whole of this pre-release material, because for some of you it's going to be some time before you sit this assessment, and you're going to go through it in a lot of detail. But just to sort of give you an idea of what you're told, we're given some background of the organisation. So how it was set up, their structure, their age, how many shops they've got, what it is that they make, how they go about making it, what they sell, that kind of information. We've then got a bit about the culture within the organisation, what their ethical stances and how they approach sustainability. So we're told here about Green Print Limited are very much about being green and undertaking sustainability initiatives. So you will have seen sustainability at levels 2 and 3 come into various papers. It's a really important area that businesses need to think about nowadays. Ethics is tested in almost all of our papers now. So there's a little bit about their ethical stance and their approach to sustainability. We're given information about what it is that they sell, how they sell it, how they manage their inventory, and what their turnover is, and also how they operate within their market. We're told a bit about the development of their market. We're told that it's a fast-growing business that they operate, which gives us the impression that this business is pushing forward, that we expect improved performance and growth in the future. We're then given some information about their strategic planning and control. Now, if something is strategic, it's a kind of organisational wide. It's looking at the entire organisation. It's looking at their long-term plans, where it is that they're going in the future. And as part of the strategic planning and control, we're given some information about their performance measures under the headings of perspectives. So we've got a bit of a balanced scorecard here on GPL, and we can see what they're measuring under each of those perspectives. So, for example, our internal business processes. So one of the perspectives of our balanced scorecard, where we look at how are we doing internally, how do we operate, how do our operations, our procedures and that all work. They're measuring, let's see, based on this perspective, see how well the business is running and whether its products conform to customer requirements and expectations. So looking at the amount of waste they have, the level of output, the number of faulty goods perhaps. The first 6 months results show that the company have performed well in relation to this perspective. The business is gradually increasing the market share of its range of products. So we're told a bit about, under that perspective, how they're doing and how we expect them to do in the future. And we've got the same under each of those 4 perspectives. We're then given some information about staff. Now, this is really important because you might receive, in one of your tasks in your exam, you might receive an email or a request, and you need to understand who it's from. Really important, you've received some information, have a check, who's it received from, have a look at this page to see what member of staff they are and what their job role is, so you can understand the kind of information they're interested in, the kind of decisions that they're involved in making. We're also given their financial statements, so this will allow us to be able to see how they're performing for a previous period. We've got their profit there, their turnover. We can do some calculations of some ratios. And we've got their statement of financial position. So we can see their financial makeup here. They've got loans, they've got ordinary share capital plus a share premium. They've got lots of funds there sat in retained earnings. We can see the kinds of assets they've got. It's all property and equipment. They hold inventory, and we can kind of see how this business runs, what position they're in, the kinds of liabilities that they've got. Something nice to note here is there's quite a big bank overdraft and a low level of cash and cash equivalents. Plus, we've got quite a lot of bank loans. So when we're looking at this preceding material, we can start to understand how this business is kind of positioned and how it's looking financially. So that's our pre-release material. Spend time on it, go through those perspectives, do a SWOT analysis, think about their competition, think about where they might be going in the future. And as far as we know, this pre-release material for the live assessments will be related to certainly our foreseeable assessments that we've got scheduled for the professional synoptic. So let me just skip forward. The format of the assessment. I've just laid up here the number of tasks they are, what those tasks are kind of roughly testing, and the number of marks that are available for each task. Although I've put some ideas here of what's being tested on each of those tasks, do bear in mind that these tasks are very holistic. So they can bring in knowledge and understanding from any area within the syllabus for all of those 4 core papers. But there's a kind of general idea on the kinds of areas that are being tested in each task. I wouldn't get too hung up on this. I would not kind of set in my head that task 1 is always going to be about roles and responsibilities of internal controls, ethical principles, identifying weaknesses in internal controls, because there might be something that seems a little bit more random pulled in the actual task in the assessment. So it gives you a rough idea. Now, what's important is what I've put over here under these key points. There are no standard styles of questions. Now, I know we kind of liked at level 2, we could do the sample assessment, we could do some mocks, and we would expect that our actual exam would be in a fairly similar style and format. Similar styles of questions, similar presentation of information and answer. At level 3, we still saw quite a lot of that. There might be the odd little bit that was very different. This level 4 synoptic assessment, your questions could be very different in every exam that's being sat. So the questions that are in the sample assessments, the questions that are within mock exams that are written by any of the training providers, any of the publishers, the questions that you end up getting in your exam might be in a very different format. So you can't kind of expect it's always going to be a table that looks like that I'm going to complete. I'm always going to be putting the information in a certain way. There is no standard style, but if you know the syllabus, you understand the application of the topics within the syllabus, you should be able to adapt to answer the question in any format that you're presented with. The important thing is that you really read the requirements well. What is it asking me to do? Can I do that? And go about writing your answer, rather than reading the question and thinking, oh, that's not like anything else I've seen. How can I squeeze what I know in how I've answered other questions into the information and requirement that I'm given here? You really need to think about, what am I being asked to do? What have I got? How can I answer this question? Anything could be tested. I mentioned earlier that even a small topical area could be tested in a big way, so be very prepared for that. Don't leave anything to chance. Formats will vary, so you might be asked to do a report, an email. You might be asked to complete a grid that's been presented. Both the written questions and the kind of gap fill questions may be presented in any format. They may be presented as a table, they might be presented as individual questions, but be prepared for the formats varying. There might be question types that you've not seen before. We had lots of comfort level 2 and 3 on the types of question styles that we saw, the matching questions, the drag and drop. You could see things that are quite different. Already mentioned, small topics could have a big question, so product life cycle could take up most of the task or something like that. You need to have detailed knowledge, so not just an awareness of, oh, that's how you calculate a particular ratio. Return on capital employed is calculated like that. You need to have a detailed knowledge and understanding of what it tells you, why we calculate it, the information that it provides, and how that information that it provides is then used in planning, control and decision making. The paper is about application and context. Whatever it is that you're discussing or talking about in a written response, you need to make it applicable to the scenario that you're given. So make sure you know that pre-seen. In the actual assessment, you're going to be given some additional unseen information. So you might be presented with as much information as you've got in that pre-release within a task that you need to absorb and use within your answer. So application is key. All of that knowledge and understanding from all of those units, you need to be able to apply it to the scenario that you're given, that GPL there. Integrated approach, remember that there's a lot of crossover between financial and management accounting. So I've put here a little bit about the grading. So I mentioned earlier, competency is set at 70%. If you get between 70 and 79%, you've got a pass, 80 to 89 merit, and 90 to 100 is a distinction. You can resit a unit to improve your grade, but it's worth bearing in mind if you get a lower grade, a lower mark, when you resit it, it will pull your grade down. Also, there's a table here of the contribution of the assessment of each of the assessments at level 4 or at professional level and what it contributes towards your final grade. So you can see here the 2 management accounting and the financial accounting papers all contribute 15% towards your final grade. The optional papers each contribute 10%, and the synoptic assessment makes up 35% of your final mark. So it's a significant amount of your final mark is dependent on the mark you get out of your synoptic assessment. Now, what I've got here is a fairly small example of a task that you might get in the synoptic. This is one which is actually within one of our mock papers. So we have the pre-release material about GPL, and then there's lots of additional information that's been given here. So we've got a little bit of introduction here. We're given an operating budget, and we're also given a budget submission statement. And this is giving us information here about a budget and how those figures have been calculated. And we can see here, I'm just going to read through the second paragraph there. Sales growth has remained relatively steady over the last 5 years. A new product is due to be launched in 2005. This product is expected to account for 20% of our sales. Now, the requirements we've got here, prepare a report. So we'll be writing a fairly detailed written response in this paper. To the Chief Accountant, Miles Harper, so we're told who it is that we're talking to about GPL, and explain the planning assumptions made and explain any weaknesses in these assumptions. So that paragraph I've just talked about there, the assumptions made this new product is going to account for 20% of their sales. Any weaknesses in this assumption, a new product being introduced, that's a significant amount of the expected sales is going to come from it. Now you'd need to pick up more, read through all of that and come up all of those assumptions and weaknesses. Key things that can pick up from part A here is that we're asked to examine the planning assumptions, we need to identify them, and we need to explain any weaknesses. We're being asked to do two things. Very important that you pick up on all parts of a question, and an explanation needs a very detailed response. So it's not just stating, it's not listing, it's actually going into detail and explaining it to make it understood. And there's a few other parts there as well. We can see this question goes into motivational impact of the budget and the product life cycle and the effect that has on the budget preparation. We can see there it's pulling in lots of topics from various areas of our management accounting papers. And there's also a bit there asking us to explain benefits that could be seen in relation to costs. So what could we expect the benefits for this organisation to be from the information that's given here? So we can see the depth of question that we can be presented with and how we can be tested on a number of subjects. This also gives us an idea of the additional information that might be presented to us in the assessment on top of the pre-release material. Take some time to read through and prepare our answer. So mentioned that we have lots of written questions, written tasks in this paper. So there's a few key points here. Make sure you make your written responses relevant to the scenario that you're given. Don't make general comments. Make comments that are applicable to GPL. Pick up on information from the pre-release material and additional information that you're given. Really important to make sure you know that pre-release well and to read thoroughly additional information that you're given and pull it into your answer. You're responding to the information that you're provided. Make sure that you write enough. Having marked for many years both mocks and real exams, there's often not enough written in responses. So if you're asked to explain, you need to explain. There needs to be more than just one small sentence written. You need to write enough that would make yourself understood. When you write a response or you make a point, ask yourself why, and then write that reason why. Explain to your marker why you've made the points that you have in your answer. Watch out for that word explain. It's not to state, it's not to list, it's more than that. Think about the bigger picture, the whole organisation. If you're making a recommendation, the impact that it has on performance, cost, staff, cash, resources that are needed, inventory. What's the impact? Think of the big picture. Impact and extent. Now, I like to think about this in a written answer. So perhaps we're looking at implementing a new system and it's going to reduce our costs. By how much is it going to reduce our costs? It's great, it's going to reduce our costs. Is it going to reduce them by a significant amount, or would the cost of implementation still outweigh the benefits? I like to, in relation to impact, always ask myself, to what extent, by how much is something going to impact on the organisation? Mentioned a few times, integrated financial and management accounting. You might be pulling both of those ideas into written responses. When you're answering tasks, always bear in mind strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats of the organisation. If you're making a recommendation, just make sure that that is building on their strengths, overcoming weaknesses or seizing opportunities, but it's not actually going to make one of those things worse or miss out on it. And I've mentioned here P. This is something which I've always used to help me answer written questions. When I make a point, I make sure my point is P. I make a point, I explain my point, and I apply it. I make sure it's relevant to the scenario that I've been given. Might be something that is useful just to bear in mind when you're writing your written answers. What have I said? Have I explained it? Have I made it applicable to the scenario that I've got? Now, the Synoptic Assessment isn't available on demand. It's only available at 6 sittings across the year. So you can see here when the Synoptic Professional Assessment is available throughout 2017. So it's available at the end of January, which I'm not imagining there's many people going to be sitting. Some of you might be looking towards March, which is quite an early sitting if you've had time to kind of power through all of the other papers and you're going to do your optional papers after. I think May is probably going to be a very busy synoptic session. Because we've got these restrictions on there only being 6 weeks that the professional papers are available, you do need to make sure that you book well in advance, that you've got a set study plan and schedule so you know which synoptic sitting you're working towards, and that you book your exam with your assessment centre in plenty of time. Every centre is limited on the number of places that they have available each day. So you want to make sure that you get the sitting that you want. So make sure in advance you've booked your place. It's unlikely that you'd be able to book in for one of these synoptic sessions a week or 2 weeks before. They'll probably be fully booked. And there's also here the tail end of the year when we've got September and December sittings. I expect the September sitting to be very busy. It's going to be a very popular session, particularly because anyone studying AAT level 4 under an apprenticeship will have to wait 12 months before they can sit their synoptic assessment. So not only this year, going forward, I think the September is always going to be a very busy synoptic sitting. So that might help you to plan when you're going to sit it. So a few key points here. You'll be presented with a number of tasks which there will be a written answer to. You may be asked to explain financial information to non-accountants. So make sure that you can explain in basic terms. And this part is really key. You're encouraged to proceed through the tasks in the Professional Diploma Synoptic Assessment in the order presented. So we've always been able to kind of jump around, do tasks in any order. For this paper, you should be looking to do them in the order in which they're presented. So I doesn't seem to want to jump forward. There we go. So there's my email address, crystalhaygreen@firstintuition.co.uk. If you have any questions, do feel free to get in contact. I hope this session has been useful and given you a bit more understanding. We will have recorded this session, so we will pop this up on our website along with the slides. But has anyone got any questions I can help with? Okay, well, I'm going to finish there. I'm going to mute my microphone, but I will be around for the next 10 minutes if you have any questions you want to pop in the chat, and I will type a response to you. So thank you all for logging in on this evening, and good luck with your studies. Do email me if you have any questions or you need any help.